Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a real huge privilege to welcome you to this very special event. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon on a rainy, pretty miserable day. But we're here to celebrate a really important book, the launch of the social economy science, which I believe is the world's first comprehensive analysis of why and how social economy organizations create superior value for society. My name is Andrea Anastasiou, and I'm the Executive Director of the Government Outcomes Lab based at the Politecnico School of Government here at Oxford. And it's a real honor to be co-hosting this discussion this evening alongside colleagues at Kellogg College, the Smith School, as well as the Skoll Center. Although I have to say, I believe Georgia didn't invite me to give welcome remarks in my capacity at the Government Outcomes Lab, but rather as the most passionate supporter of the book. And that's something that he's put in his signed dedication on my very own, not even a hard copy of the book, but a bounded proof. So one of the first 8 editions of the book. And in fact, I'm such a passionate supporter that last year, Georgie and I worked together on a pre-launch for the book at our annual conference, again here in Oxford. So Georgie, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the second launch in Oxford that the book is having. And I think the third overall, if not the fourth.
I think the 50.
Oh, the fifth. Oh gosh, I can't keep up. But anyway, all I wanted to say, you're all here to hear from our incredible panel. So I'll keep my remarks very, very brief. And all I wanted to say, rather than explain to everyone why this book is so important and so valuable, I think you all know that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I hope you'll indulge me in sharing why I personally really love the book. And there's a very simple reason for that. It's simply the ethos of the book. To me, it's just so wonderful to see a book that is so committed to bridging academic, practice, and policy perspectives, and see that doing it really, really well. So throughout each chapter, I know there are contributions both from academic voices and practitioners. So nothing left to chance, the sort of like real life application, practical implications, practical examples, not an afterthought, but front and center of that book. So I think in that way, the book is a real bridge builder across the academic community and the practice, also across different academic disciplines, which is also something really exciting to see, and also across different geographies and different contexts. So I really enjoyed in the book learning from example, not just from the UK and Europe, but from lots of other countries in Africa, Asia, and beyond. So I suppose I feel like that the book really succeeds in its ambition to show the powerful things we can achieve when we engage in deep and meaningful dialogue across policy, academia, and practice. And I hope it's very much in this spirit that we're going to be conducting this discussion this evening. So without further ado, I'll invite my colleague El Carter to introduce the discussion and our amazing panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for those welcoming remarks. It's really great to be here to launch this book, but not just to launch this book. We're going to be asking a crucial question, which is, why should we learn from social economy science to address sustainability challenges? And I know that this is the pre-dinner talk this evening, so some people may be very familiar with social economy, and indeed I think some contributors to chapters are in the audience tonight, so welcome. But this also might be a less familiar concept for some members of the audience. So I think we're in a fantastic position having one of the leading authors and editors with us this evening. So first up in our discussion this evening, I'm going to welcome Gorgi Krlev to give an overview of the book and some of the key messages and its mission. And then we have a fantastic lineup of panelists to get into a discussion this evening. So I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Professor Marya Besharov, who is Professor of Organisation and Impact at Saïd Business School, and Marya is also the Academic Director of the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship. So welcome, Marya. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Dr. Aoife Brophy. So thank you for joining us, Aoife. Aoife is a departmental research lecturer in innovation and enterprise, both at the Smith School of Enterprise. And then we're also joined by Professor Laura Spence. Laura is Professor of Business Ethics at Royal Holloway, University of London, is also a Fellow at Kellogg College, and is also affiliated with Saïd. So you can sense from the multi-institutional hats across our panel that this is a very well-connected set of panellists, and I think that's really actually something quite distinctive, both about the book and about our panel, is we have a discussion that's at ease and comfortable crossing boundaries, crossing disciplines, crossing geographies, and that's not always the case in the academy. So I think we have a very precious thing going on here this evening in our discussion. So we had a bit of a conflab with the contributors before the session, and we decided that we wanted to be quite challenge focused. So we will each be bringing something a bit provocative, but also constructive, to focus our minds at the interface of social economy and sustainability issues in our discussion this evening. So you can expect a bit of grit and a bit of challenge. But first up, let me pass to Gorgi, who will say a few words about the book. And it's not just a book, it's a book with a mission. So we're looking forward to hearing about that from you, Gorgi. Thank you.
Thanks very much for being here. I think this is a special event also because this is college where I was during my DPhil, so I'm back as a fellow of the college now, and I'm really happy that Jonathan is hosting us and giving us the opportunity to discuss social economy science again. I will be very brief. We've done similar events in Paris with a policy focus with practitioners, and actually it was quite delightful to give a little bit of input, but then to actually lean back and enjoy the show. So that's what I plan to do tonight as well. I still want to give you some snapshots in relation to what is this book about. I mean, you know the title already, Social Economy Science, and I think it's the culmination maybe, or maybe it's the start of another journey, but certainly one where many people in our field have been really working on organizations, social enterprises, but also more traditional organizations, such as associations. First of all, I would like to briefly define what we mean by social economy. Right? So there's a traditional strand of the social economy that is about associations, cooperatives, value-based organizations, but also a newer, more modern development in a way where we have social enterprises, so-called social tech startups, meaning organizations that use technology in order to address certain social and environmental problems. And that's what you essentially see on the next slide. And the guiding question in all of this is, why would you be interested in the social economy? And I was saying something about a journey, and this journey is actually one which started with, a lot of question marks, a lot of people, being irritated. Why would you study the social economy, especially as someone who's at the business school? Those are small organizations. There are no unicorns. They sometimes don't even have a business model. So why would you even be interested, right? And so first of all, as I said, I would like to give you an overview of what the social economy even is, right? So you have this spread that I was mentioning already from advocacy groups still, and we're very comprehensive in terms of what we're sort of subsuming under the social economy, so-called benefit corporations, right? Which are really organizations that are market-driven, but that are focusing on the benefits for society and putting impact first, right? And so this is essentially the idea that we have of the social economy as a field that is becoming more recognized, right? If you look into the foreword of this book, which was published by Oxford University Press, we have Adam Swallow, our editor here as well, and it's also available open access, so anyone can just go and read it. You're going to see that there's a bit of a celebration here that a major university press such as OUP is really bringing this out as a piece that is trying to highlight why the social economy matters, right? And I think over time we've actually seen that there is more and more recognition for various reasons of what the social economy is, right? One thing is the number of social enterprises that are now being recognized. There's an issue of data availability, of even understanding what this field even is, right? We have better data now. This is, again, from our friends at the World Economic Forum, who've also contributed to the book. Those 10 million enterprises, 2 trillion in terms of annual revenue, 200 million jobs, and then this line, which I think is quite, striking, just came out in Forbes, saying that the social economy is actually bigger than the telecom industry or the apparel industry, right? So even if you look at it in terms of the numbers and in terms of the quantity, the social economy is becoming more important. But, and I think that's really the thing that is, driving me in terms of being interested in this whole sector, is another one, and you might already have seen it when I was, jumping through the slides, so you might not be quite as amazed and puzzled and surprised by this crazy graph that I'm going to show you now, which is the beginning of my 1-hour lecture, so we're going to skip the no, jokes aside, what I wanted to essentially say is what's very important here are those transformation pathways, innovation for impact, agents of change, and partnerships. And I think that's exactly why the social economy matters, right? One is, as I was saying, innovation for impact. One of the pathways by which the organizations in the social economy field are actually cross-pollinating other sectors, right? Where the idea is in impact investing, for instance, that you put impact first and that you really are true and adamant about what the values are that are connected to impact, rather than doing something that is more ESG oriented, which is a risk management tool, but not really looking at the impact that organizations have on the planet and on society. The second pathway being agents of change. We have Julie Batilana, a good colleague of ours, who is at Harvard thinking about how social enterprises are actually a great case where you can see how you democratize organizations, right? How you build more participatory organizations, which we all know is a huge issue, in what you might call the mainstream economy. And then the last one, and that's actually a chapter where Eleanor has been contributing, is that we're also talking about partnerships, right? So we're not looking at the social economy in isolation, but really looking into, how do they partner up with the private sector and the public sector. Eleanor talking about relational approaches to public service contracting and how you can improve public services by means of this collaboration. And I'll leave you with this slide. I don't know, we can either, just make it vanish, or we'll leave it up here so that you're always reminded of, why the social economy matters. And it's actually those transformation pathways, which are essential and which I hope are the, touch points where we can actually engage with the learnings for broader sustainability transformation. So I'll hand it over to the panel and lean back, and as you will enjoy the show.
Thank you so much, Gorgi. I think anyone who describes a book of this size as the start of a journey clearly has great vision, but thank you for setting us up for our conversation. But Marya, tensions and paradox feature very heavily in your work, and so I just wondered if I could pass to you for a few remarks to draw out those themes and think about what we can learn from the social economy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Elle and Gorgi. Thank you for writing the book and really bringing us all together for this event. It's great to be here with my fellow panelists and with all of you. And I'm going to offer a few thoughts on the work that I've done on the social economy. And my perspective is really about the organizational dynamics of the social economy. And if we're going to, since we have this slide up here, really about what goes on in the center is really challenging, really exciting, but really challenging, and what it takes to make sure it moves to the right, basically, in terms of leading and managing social economy organizations. And this is something that I've been studying now for over 20 years. I first got interested in this space when the term social enterprise was just taking off, and venture philanthropy was being discussed in Silicon Valley, and lots of venture capitalists and entrepreneurs were turning their sights to the social sector. And I was out there at the time and wondering, this could be amazing, this could be terrible, how is it going to play out? And that sort of started to animate my work in this space. And I have looked over the past 2+ decades at the organizational challenges of operating in the social economy, particularly at social enterprises, but also at other forms of organizing that are in this space. And I'm going to tell you about some of the challenges and then how we navigate those challenges around paradox. And I'm going to ground it in an example, which is an organization I've studied for many years called Digital Divide Data, which is a social enterprise. They often describe themselves as a nonprofit company. They were founded in 2001. With an office in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, with a mission of breaking the cycle of poverty among youth in Southeast Asia through IT work. But they didn't set up a training center, right? They were very much operating a business, although they were incorporated as a nonprofit. And the point was to develop skills and provide employment opportunities in the IT business as a means of helping to break the cycle out of poverty for young people. They've expanded beyond Southeast Asia, also to Kenya and the US, and there's really a thriving data business today, still with this social mission. So very much operating in the center and have been part of catalyzing some of the shifts to the right. And many other organizations like them I've studied over the years. And there's an exciting opportunity. I mean, some of what DVD believed was that really by harnessing and blending the market and the social mission, they could come up with more effective, more innovative approaches, right, as Gorgi has described, that can be pathways for others. And really, they were part of building the impact sourcing industry. But importantly, it was not an easy journey. I mean, starting an entrepreneurial venture is never an easy journey. But I want to highlight a few of the challenges that emerge in organizations like Digital Divide Data and just say a few words about how we can think about effectively navigating those challenges. Really, two that show up in terms of internal challenges in social enterprises and social economy organizations. One is around managing conflict and tensions between individuals, groups, constituencies in the organization, as well as units, business units potentially, that are oriented more towards the social, more towards the economy and the business side. And that showed up in an organization like Digital Divide Data in terms of questions about who to hire. Are they hiring based on skill, or are they hiring based on social need? Sometimes the populations they were working with could type 8 words a minute, and that wasn't going to cut it for the clients that they were bringing in. So how they navigated those kinds of decisions and those kinds of tensions between the people working with the employee base and the people working with the clients was a real challenge in the organization, just to ground that tension of managing between the social and the economy side. And the related is, of course, the challenge of drift, right, of sort of becoming more the business or becoming more the pure social nonprofit. And so the question that has animated a lot of my work is how you manage those twin challenges of internal tensions and conflict, and then the issue of drift. And what we find is sort of 3 broad practices, all of which are about paradox and sort of embracing the both and rather than the either or. The first practice is really about the mindset you adopt, and adopting a mindset of seeking and looking for integrative solutions, or looking for opportunities to bring the social and the business together, rather than treating business decisions or operational decisions or strategic decisions as this versus that. It doesn't always mean you have an answer, but you're asking the question differently. So the mindset piece of embracing paradox, embracing both and, is really important. And the second piece that we see that is really important is about structures, and creating enabling structures in these social economy organizations that can really sort of hold you to both the social and the business part, right? And I talk about these as guardrails. So building in metrics, goals, dedicated roles, dedicated units, sometimes relationships with different stakeholder organizations outside the social enterprise, that can remind you of the dual purpose that you're pursuing and really hold you to that when you're at risk of drifting. And so the enabling structures really set a bounded space that you're operating in with your strategy. And then the third piece is action, right? And the notion of experimenting, learning, and adapting. So a more dynamic approach to action. Now, of course, we talk about that in general with entrepreneurial ventures, but as social economy organizations grow and become larger and more inert, that adaptive, dynamic approach is often really hard to retain. It's facilitated by enabling structures and the mindset piece. So that's a set of practices, all in this realm of embracing paradox, embracing the both and, that we found to be helpful. Not easy, right? The journey is never over. And the last thing before I pass to Aoife, I'll say is that I've talked about the social economy, I haven't referenced sustainability, but one of the things that we see in this work is that these practices are really important across a whole wider set of organizations that are grappling with dual purposes, including in global firms that are thinking about sustainability and SMEs that are thinking about sustainability. And so it's been a laboratory, if you will, by studying these social economy organizations for understanding broader processes that can be useful for navigating really core organizational challenges.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Marya. I think there was a really emphatic call in there to embrace the paradox And just like to point out that your Harvard Business Review article elaborates on many of those themes. So if you would like to elaborate on that concept of paradox, that's a great reference for you. Next up, I'd like to come to you, Aoife. I know that your work really investigates the role of business in navigating and contributing to system transformations and transitions for sustainable development. And I know that you want to talk a bit more about the challenge of scale and different geographies that we need to think about in our work at the intersection between social economy and sustainability questions. So I'd love to bring you in on that. Thanks, Aoife.
Thanks very much, Eleanor. And I'll just pick up directly from where Marya left off, actually, because I don't actually see myself as purely studying the social economy. And I think this is one of the real privileges of reading the book and engaging with the book and being part of this conversation is that I think the social economy offers us such a huge opportunity to be able to influence the mainstream economy. I think that's where we need to be directing our efforts, and that's the really challenging part of really pushing forward lots of different agendas that we need to push forward in the coming years. My work has been focused on innovation and entrepreneurship for sustainable development, but that has really taken me to look at very many different intersections, and I think this is common of all of us sitting up here on the panel, and that's challenging in many different ways, and I'll come to that towards the end of my remarks. I've always been interested in this intersection between business and the environment in particular, and that requires looking at social economy organizations, but it also requires looking at very large organizations that, as Marya mentioned, are struggling to be able to change and integrate purpose and mission just as social economy organizations have been able to do at their core. And I think that's the really exciting part of being able to take this journey forward, which I hope you do, Gorgi, because it's really exciting to see so many different threads and so many different intersections, as Eleanor already mentioned. So what I'd like to do is just focus on kind of three themes that I think overlap with some of my work and that I thought came out really strongly in the book. The first is that I think social economy organizations offer us this opportunity to overcome the separation between environment and society. And I think this is something that we really need to be doing more of. Much of my work, as I said, has been focused on business and the environment, but increasingly in my teaching and my research, I don't see a separation between society and the environment anymore. And I think that's where we really need to be pushing much of our research and teaching in universities. We see in the literature and in practice that there is still often a separation. So we have literature on social entrepreneurship separate from environmental entrepreneurship. We have different academic communities that focus on social issues and management, for example, and then we have divisions that are focused on organizations and the natural environment. They do speak to each other, and they're starting to speak to each other more. I think that made a lot of sense when these areas of environmental focused social economy organizations, for example, or the more socially oriented organizations, when these were niches, but they're not niches anymore. And we are seeing this really big push in mainstream organizations to engage with complexity and the systemic nature of interdependent, complex challenges. And you can't separate the social from the environmental. And I think that's both an opportunity for social economy research, but it's also a challenge because there's still quite a lot of siloed thinking, I think, when we're considering even the terminology that we use, the social enterprise. What does that really mean? How do we actually reflect in our language this connection between society and the environment? Because we're seeing it play out in the real world. Right? The challenges that we're experiencing, they don't separate between environment and society anymore. We're experiencing that with the intensity of different intertwined crises. They're very interdependent. And this dichotomy of us versus nature is also false. And it's a modern dichotomy that we've developed and created many different problems as a result. So I think this huge attention to climate and the environment actually, and net zero targets, and we have the Oxford Net Zero initiative that tracks many different targets across the world of different entities. That is limited in some ways, of course, because we have this lens of net zero, but I think it offers an opportunity, this focus on climate and environmental issues, to mainstream and connect with social issues as well. And we're seeing that in things like a bigger focus on climate justice. And what that does, this kind of these interconnections between very complex issues, it requires leaders, as Marya has mentioned, to be able to think paradoxically, to be able to manage the trade-offs between many of the different things that we're expecting organizations, both large and small, to be able to do. And I think we've learned a lot from social economy organizations that now needs to be implemented at scale in very many different types of organizations across the mainstream economy. The second thing, so this is kind of the first being kind of the separation between environment and society. The second thing that I really enjoyed about the book, and Eleanor, you mentioned this already, that there is this diversity across geographies. And what I think we really need to acknowledge in the social economy and in transforming the mainstream economy is that we need very many diverse approaches that are context relevant, context specific. And I think that is also a real strength of social economy organizations, but it's not necessarily always the case. And what I really enjoyed actually in the book is that there is a critical reflection in one of the chapters on Western social enterprise approaches being adopted and transferred to East Africa. There are really big problems associated with doing that. I do a lot of work in East Africa, and particularly on electrification of rural communities. Some of the work that we've been doing has highlighted really big differences between the entrepreneurs that are locally embedded and those with founders from local communities. They have lived experience in the communities. They understand the problems that communities are facing on a daily basis. They don't just understand, they can listen deeply in ways that, frankly, international companies and their founders cannot do. And I think it's really damaging for us to purely focus on social enterprise as being positive. There are dark sides to social enterprise, and we need to be very mindful that we are embedding and using approaches that embed with local knowledge. And what we found in our work is that local founders are just able to do that in a much more in a much deeper way. They have respect for local knowledge and traditions, and they have very different approaches to entrepreneurship. And so I think we need to be, and this is a really good start in the book, I think we need to be looking at that diversity and learning from different contexts, whether it's East Africa or other geographies, and learning from places in Africa to apply to overcome some of the challenges that we've created in higher income countries. So this kind of diversity and acknowledging the need for diversity across geographies, I think it's remarkable that that comes out very strongly in the book, and I really commend Gorgi and the team for being able to do that so well. And the third thing that I wanted to finish on is the need to embrace interdisciplinary approaches. I'm in a joint position between a business school and the School of Geography, and the people that I tend to work with in the business school, they connect with other people across other departments. We need to be doing that kind of connecting to be able to address some of these systemic challenges that we face and to push towards this kind of transformation of the mainstream economy. But we need to be recognizing then the limitations of our individual disciplines, and particularly business schools and organization and management scholars connecting with other disciplines. And what I love about the book is that you're doing that by connecting with systems literature. So the sustainability transitions literature in particular, it's a community that I've also connected with in my own work. But it's not difficult to do this. It is difficult to do this kind of work. It's not easy at all. The incentives in universities, unfortunately, need to change to be able to enable people to do the kind of work that we need to be doing across different across disciplines. And so I suppose I don't want to finish on a downer, but I think you can see examples here of in the book and among the panelists of attempts to be able to do that, to break down boundaries, and I think it's remarkable that you've been able to do that with a community as wonderful as comes across in the book. So thank you very much, Gorgi.
Great, thank you, Laura. I was so struck by your observation on the importance of listening and the role of local founders in that, and also again picking up this theme of kind of paradox and tension, and not needing to shy away from that, but actually embedding that in order to overcome this kind of blunt separation between social and environmental consent. So thank you. I should say that we'll have time for questions. So I wanted to point that out before passing over to Laura. So please do be getting some questions ready for the panel, because we'll have time to come to those. But Laura, I wanted to bring you in because your work often brings quite a critical lens to corporate social responsibility, to the intersection of business and the social economy. So I would love to hear, what do you think is important as we explore the connection between social economy and business, and social economy and the environment as we tackle sustainability challenges? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yes, I guess I'm starting off on a downer. It's rather inevitable that we start to really, because this is really a marvelous contribution, and one starts to think, yes, we can really make something of this. And my critical brain then starts to think, what are the dangers? What are the risks? Because this seems to me like a marvelous opportunity, and let's all work together to really maximise and magnify the opportunity that we have in front of us. So I've got a few notes of caution, if you'll forgive me, because this is too important for us to not get right. One of them is as somebody who always works outside the mainstream myself, I know very well how dangerous it is really not to be really aware of who gets left out if we really focus our conversation in a particular way. And in reading the book and the ideas around the social economy, which I also work on myself in different ways, I think there's so much to cheer about. One of the lines in the book is about cheering for the underdog. That's me. I'm with you all the way. However, then the note of caution comes. I think we need to be a little bit careful about the context that might get left out, exactly as Aoife was just saying. That some cultural context this might not fit, so we need to be careful of trying to sort of impose it. There might be industries where the social economy doesn't fit. I was thinking, how many fair trade oil companies do we have? Can we imagine a B Corp or a social enterprise in the tobacco industry? Sometimes this simply won't fit. So we are then excluding ourselves from conversations with those groups if we're not sort of smart about what we're doing. So there's context, there's actors, particularly we've had mention of small and medium-sized enterprises, and in the lovely picture with the blobs across it, which I think is really, really, really beautiful and marvellous. I did think, so small and medium-sized enterprises, 99% of businesses around the world would probably be in the traditional box. I've done a lot of work on small firms, and I would say actually they're a wonderful example where there can be this amalgamation between social and commercial goals, and yet they fit in the traditional business environment. So let's keep talking about how we can understand where small businesses might fit into the social economy. And having done lots of interviews with small firms where they will say, no, we don't do anything about our social context. And while I'm sitting there interviewing them, a school child comes in and says, can I just do a bit of tool work for my project in school? And then the business owner says, oh, no, yes, not now. Your school are coming next week, you can do it then. And you find out just by engaging with small businesses how embedded, sometimes, not always, but they can be in their local community. And they don't treat it as something different from core business. It's just what they do. So, where do they fit in? Let's keep working on that and think how we can engage with that. So context, actors, and then concepts. So I sit in a business school, I teach moral philosophy. It can be quite challenging and amusing sometimes, but it does push me to really think about the concepts that are used, whether it's around transitions and transformations, and I'm thinking, so where's the social justice, where's the just transition, how do we make a link to that? We talk about productivity, value creation, compliance, strategies, strategic human resource management. All of these concepts are things which we need to be able to communicate with the commercial world, and yet will play out quite differently, I suspect, in the social economy. Or at least we need to be really thinking through, if we want to convince the mainstream, we also need to be able to use their language and at least teach them a new language along the way. If you don't do that by not being able to be understood. So context, actors and concepts, I'm a little bit concerned that we might, by focusing on the social economy, be missing some critical things in order to engage more widely and make that step to a more sustainable and socially aware and just economy and society, which I hope we all would like to see. And that leads me to something I think we're going to pick up in the further discussion, which is around the research methods and the research tools that we have to hand. There's plenty within the sort of current social economy world and different approaches to understand things. Let's make use of those. But I'm a little bit worried that we shouldn't try to import certainly the business school standard models and theories and research methods into the social economy without reflecting on whether they are fit for purpose. That sets us up a little bit.
Thank you, Laura. That questioning of who's being left out, I think, is such a poignant question to keep asking ourselves in our work. But I actually wonder if that last question around the appropriate use of different methods as we navigate this terrain, as we explore the intersection between social economy and sustainability issues, what tools should we be using? Do we need to be more critical about the way in which we research in this space? So I just wanted to turn that to the other panelists and see if you had any reflections or observations on the way we go about doing our research in this space.
I'm happy to start off. Sure, I'm happy to start off. I want to pick up on a point that Aoife made about social entrepreneurs and turn that to ourselves as researchers, right? Which is, you were talking about social entrepreneurs who don't understand the local context, aren't from the community, and are developing a solution, and it often is not really what the community needs or wants. And we had this discussion in my MBA class today as well about this phenomenon. So it's very much on my mind, and I think sometimes we commit that as a researcher, right? We parachute in and ask the questions we think are important to ask and analyze the data in the way that we are trained to analyze it, rather than listening to the people and the organizations and the communities and the systems that we're trying to learn from and learn with. And so I think that's not just a method at the sort of fine point, but that's a whole approach to doing research that's quite different. And I mean, at the Skoll Center, we talk about research practice initiatives rather than research initiatives, in part because we're trying to emphasize we're trying to even start by designing the study or asking the question in partnership with the people who are experiencing and living with the problems that we're trying to understand. And so that we're not bringing our questions in, but we're sort of co-creating. And I think that's really important, and it's super hard to do in the structures that we have in our institutions right now.
Yeah, actually, the first thing that I thought about was how we do our own research, and that really needs to change. And I think part of it is developing collaborations with people who are closer to the problems that we're studying, so that we can learn from them and adapt our own approaches. I think that some of the challenges associated with that are that we, as Marya mentioned, the structures are set up for us to publish in certain types of journals that might not necessarily be the types of journals that are important for the universities that we might partner with in other places. And so that requires kind of really big conversations actually at an institutional level and across different geographies to unpack. The second thing that came to mind is the need for multi-level methods across the board. It's very difficult to be able to study this. Right? There's just so much going on at different levels. What are the different interactions, the connections? I was just talking to Meline, who's in the audience, and is a PhD student doing work on entrepreneurial ecosystems. And it's very difficult to wrap your head around kind of systems concepts. because there are so many different interdependencies and different levels of analysis, and I think we need to be engaging much more across different disciplines to be able to figure those things out, because we've been pretty good at understanding kind of maybe the drivers for some of these things, but not necessarily the outcomes of what it is that we're trying to study here. So, you know, and I'm guilty of this in my own work. I think sometimes we think we're studying outcomes, but actually when you step back, you think actually, no, there's just so much more going on that we can't capture with the existing data that we have access to, the existing methodological tools.
Thank you. I need to name check an audience member here as well. Paul, where have you gone? Paul Degay. So Paul and I wrote an article in response really to the sort of the research impact agenda that UK academics will be very aware of. It's a tyranny, I'd say. Really, as being pro-impact and engagement and looking at outcomes, and the book very much, you know, has this from the get-go engagement between academia and practice and policy. You know, absolutely, completely buy into that. The challenge is, again, with our systems and structures that we as academics have to kind of tick the boxes of, is that we tend to think about that kind of engagement in case study terms for our assessment method of the research excellence framework. And actually what Paul and I have been advocating for is the idea of research involvement, so that as researchers we understand the stakeholders of our research, and we seek to engage where appropriate and where possible, and over different times that will change. And we seek to engage with them through kind of joint cultivation, the kind of co-creation idea, and understand the people that we research, not as in a them and us idea, but as part of this wider project that we're engaging with. And that involves quite an unacademic idea of being humble. Humble with our expertise, you know, in reflecting many of the points that have been said. And I think also that reflexivity point, you know, it's a very common approach in feminist research to take a stance of humility and awareness of power differentials and the asymmetry of our power differentials, and to seek to foreground the voice of the marginalised and those that perhaps don't normally have a voice in our research approach and all that we do as academics. You know, so it's quite a new experience for an academic to go in without their expertise and to use the tools that we have available to us for a greater good, not for our fabulous journal article, which somehow we also need to do. But you know, there is definitely a point in here about how we engage with the academic community, which maybe we also need to transition just as radically as the organisations that we're researching. So, well, that's another panel. Thank you.
Can I try that briefly? Yes, Eleanor has trapped me on the panel. Now I can also say something. I just wanted to say, I think in general, I mean, what we have already in the book is this idea of scholar practitioners and practitioner scholars, right? Somehow breaking the boundaries between what's supposed to be practice and policy and what's supposed to be research. But I think there's actually an even bigger point here, and the possibility for a paradigm shift that is looking at something that's called design science, right? Where you're actually going in to a scientific endeavor, but instead of just understanding, explaining, comprehending, describing, you're actually trying to solve things, right? As part of the research process, which is going to help us, decrease the time that it actually needs to have something that we call science practice transfer, right? Which I just came across an article, apparently takes the answer to a question is 17 years. What is the question? The question is how long it takes for medical research to actually get implemented in practice. And that's a mind-blowingly long number, right? And if we're thinking about social science research, I mean, we have all of those nice concepts and everything, but actually getting them implemented is really hard. And I think really trying to think about this in a more integrated way is really a chance, especially in relation to this, phenomenological field.
Thank you so much.
I think this is a great moment to start bringing in some questions from the audience. So please do signal if you'd like to ask a question. Oh, there's one at the back as well. Great, okay. Hey, we've got someone wearing a green cardigan that I'd love to call on. Thank you.
I guess I'm really intrigued by the sort of paradigm shifts that can happen within academia, and I wondered if you were empowered to make one radical change to higher education, if the panels could give us one each of what radical change they might make from a higher education perspective.
What a radical question. Great. Who'd like to take that first?
Sorry.
I can give it a go. I would push for business schools to fundamentally change their list of journals.
Oh, yeah.
That would help a lot. I think we need to, reevaluate, and some business schools are doing this, but many are not necessarily as open, I think, to interdisciplinary research as they need to be, and especially business really has this powerful force behind it, and I think that would be a big step change if we could see that happen across the board. Might be radical.
One university that I know is talking about having buildings in which there are no departments, if you see what I mean. So rather than have a business bit and an engineering bit and a biology bit, there is integration in the building itself. It's yet to happen. I've yet to see it in practice, but I did think, well, that would be different, because the whole understanding of who your colleagues are, shifts and change, and it would, I hope, it wouldn't work if that weren't followed by promotion systems and structures which acknowledge that changing context and environment. So mixing it up would be one way.
Sure, I'm happy to throw something in there. I think we need to shift how we think about research excellence. We tend to count. We need to become comfortable with the ambiguity of quality beyond just counting in many ways, whether it's journal outputs or grants or dollars, or whatever it is. It's going to be complicated, but we have to grapple with that. And we teach this when we teach about impact measurement to social enterprises, but we don't practice it.
Yeah, maybe I could also add briefly, I think it's changing incentive structures, right? In terms of really being able to invest in work that is valuable, that is part of maybe design science, that is actually helping solve things, because otherwise everything seems like a waste of time, right? Including, working with people on the ground, engaging in science practice transfer, writing books even, right? But I mean, there are more and more crazy people who are, just doing it, which is a good thing. And I think there's some change going on. And at the same time, if we want to embrace that, we actually need to change those incentive structures. Otherwise, it's just always a trade-off that you need to go into, which is a shame if we're thinking about all of the sustainability challenges and how much they need all of us, right? In terms of really being able to engage in those processes and issues.
Great. A lovely selection of answers to a tricky question. Thank you. I see a couple of hands. There's one at the back, but we've actually got a question right in front. Thank you. And then we'll come to the person at the back. Thanks.
Julian Darley. Since you've asked for challenging questions, firstly, social economy science, that middle word economy, but no one, I haven't read the book, I look forward to it, but no one's mentioned capitalism. That is, after all, the driving economy. A couple of problems with capitalism in terms of environment, energy, society. So that's the first question. And the second question, Jensen Huang, who is the founder and CEO of what is on its way to being the world's largest company, that's to say NVIDIA, who make most of the world's AI chips, said in a very recent interview that in 5 years' time he envisages there being no software developers. My question, therefore, is what is the impact of AI? Have you considered the impact of AI, the AI revolution, and the robot revolution, which is happening this year? We had the AI revolution last year with the effects flowing through. Robot revolution this year. It's already started. That's surely going to have a colossal effect. So I'd be really interested in your views on those two.
Thank you for that question. On the point around kind of a lack of conversational capitalism so far. Laura, I sensed your eyebrows go up on that, so maybe I'll come to you and then maybe Gorgi, you have some reflections on AI.
Yeah, but like all students, I have it written. It was on one of my notes. honest it was. But yeah, in fact, I didn't go into it because I thought that's just everything. How do we even start to tackle that? But it's very true that there, I suppose, remains a question, unanswered question about whether we can really expand social economy to embrace the mainstream in capitalist systems. Not the way they are now is probably, and we haven't also mentioned politics, and I mean real big P politics. You know, there are quite different priorities in terms of policies around this stuff according to which colour the government in power has. So we shouldn't ignore that. That's part of the context issue as well. I think I might leave AI. Duck out that one.
Yeah, I can actually briefly follow up on what Laura was saying, and also I think maybe justifying why we actually call this social economy science, right? Because there's also a lot of talk about, you know, the impact economy, the sustainable economy, and all of that, right? And I think we made a conscious choice in saying this is social because it really signals this is values-laden work, right? Which sometimes actually denies, you know, the capitalistic mindset and the way of thinking and always thinking in terms of business models, right? That's also something that I encounter with my students. You know, whenever you tell them, you know, address the sustainability challenges, they're like, yeah, but how do I build a business model around that? And I'm like, you know, take a step back, try to understand what the sustainability challenge is, how we're addressing it, right? With many different approaches, as we've heard from Marya, right? Where you actually need a different kind of mindset. And then we can think about, you know, the capitalism and some of those principles that are actually good as drivers of those kinds of innovations and so on, right? But I think we also somehow want to build a bit of a counterpoint to this. On the one hand side, being a transitory field, trying to trespass those boundaries, and at the same time still, you know, having this core which, you know, is not movable, right? Which is not negotiable. So at least that's the idea of how we think this cross-pollination can only work, because otherwise you have this mainstreaming, watering down, and in the end everything's impact, everything's sustainable, although we haven't changed anything yet. The second thing is we actually have a chapter by Jeff Morgan, who used to be the CEO of Nesta, the innovation agency in the UK that is engaging with artificial intelligence, fourth industrial revolution. So you might want to check that out. I think it's like two different kinds of things. I think artificial intelligence and robotics and everything are actually going to free a lot of space to engage more in the social, right? We heard from Eva how the environmental transition is foremost maybe even a social transition, right? It's not so much a technological question. We have all of that, but it's still not happening, right? We have the farmers' protests, we have Fridays for Future, and everything's like going against each other, right? And I think really being able to dedicate more to the human side, to this kind of work, is going to be really important. And at the same time, I think artificial intelligence and all of that technology can be a huge driver to actually leverage what the social economy is doing, right? I'm always saying, you know, why do you use artificial intelligence to improve your pricing strategy, which brings us back to capitalism? Why don't you use it to combat food waste, right? Or why do you use it in order to, you know, I was just recently discussing this with a PhD student, trying to help L'Oreal make, you know, better, you know, propositions of what cosmetics to buy. And why don't you just use the same kind of technology in order to decrease, you know, racial bias, gender biases, and so on, in terms of, you know, how we are actually, you know, providing information, how we're shaping ideas of roles in society, right? So I think that it's actually nothing that's going to threaten the social economy. I think it's actually going to leverage it in two ways, opening possibilities and resources, capacity, and at the same time can actually be used, but it needs to be used responsibly to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions and the answers, particularly bringing us into a more positive and opportunity-focused discussion around AI there, Gorgi. I see one question at the back. Thank you. I think this will be our last question. I'm sorry, maybe the panel will have time afterwards. But as the panelists answer your question, I wonder if we might also invite you to sum up with a couple of key reflections. But thank you.
Marketing. International export finance programs are changing. they're embracing it always tends to happen. International exporter programs are changing. They're embracing services, ESG, and the just transition. And this is actually quite important based on a number of remarks made by you all. What can academia do to get involved as a service to bridge the gap in these international programs?
Right, do you have the receipts? I'll start in. I mean, I think so. I was just telling Laura before the panel started about a conversation I was having, not in that industry, but in the FMCG company, so a fast-moving consumer goods company, about just transitions. And their proposition to us was, help us figure out what just transition means in our industry, right? So you said, people are going in this direction, but what does that mean? Can we have a common set of standards and practices? If there's really the motivation and the resource to do it, we can bring knowledge and build knowledge, co-create it about how to do this effectively in different industries. So I'll start us off there. Oh, am I supposed to also? Please. Right, okay, so my provocation or my ending thought is, what would it take or what would it look like to bring a both and mindset to your situation, your challenge? And I think that can apply to lots of the issues we've talked about. But and I'll just say in particular, we talked about changing academia, right? What would it take to both shift and dismantle, but also work within the current, because the dismantling isn't going to happen overnight, right? And I think in many of the challenges we've talked about, we could reframe as a both and. So I invite you to do that.
As I'll never be. Let's do it. So yes, extraordinary discussion. Thinking about just transition issues. My concern actually is not with the sort of international context where I think there is already quite a lot of work going on, but it's on the ground, so to speak. Again, those small firms that are perhaps getting left out of the just transition conversations probably don't know how it applies to them at all. We've got an awful lot of work to do there. So I think, in each industry, in each organisational type, we need to keep pushing on what the idea of a just transition means. My closing thought would be to just be careful of unintended consequences of what we're doing, and to make sure that we are kind of all working together, keep pushing the envelope, coming up with progressive ideas and accepting that we are going to have to rock the boat in order to make some good changes. But with that come new marginalised communities, new marginalised groups, and it's inevitable. It's inevitable if we want to make change. That we will leave some behind some way or another. So let's keep working to really think systemically about all the impacts of the wonderful future that lies before us.
So I think the big thing that I take away from the conversation is that we really need to challenge ourselves as researchers, actually, and that we need to be. I think we're doing some of that work to overcome boundaries, but we can do more, particularly in pushing for change in structures and applying what we teach to our students to about kind of social economy organizations to the work that we do, the research that we do. And I think in terms of the kind of the call to action, I think going back to one of the first things that I mentioned about overcoming this dichotomy between us and nature, I would just encourage everybody to really engage in their community, in nature, and to be listening and to be enjoying the work that you do and the people that you're interacting with, because I think that's at the heart of the social economy, and I think we need to be doing a lot more of that, being a lot more mindful in our daily lives, and to be able to kind of move things forward and push for transformation.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent question. It actually helps me make my last point in a way, and that was something that we discussed earlier, Eleanor, which you eventually ended up not asking. Why have we chosen social economy science, right? Why the science in the title? Why, why are we even, trying to somehow coin this term, right? And in the book, we're essentially saying not trying to build something that's, artificial and that feels like a new branding exercise, but it's really trying to see in how far these kinds of actions, the transformations, the practices can actually be evidence-based, right? And to use the power of research methods, whichever ones they may be, more classical ones or the more participatory ones that we talked about. And I think it's really all about evidence. And that brings me back to, my own DPhil on impact and impact measurement. A lot of inspiration from evidence-based healthcare, methods training in there and so on. And I think it's really about this, right? Really science being able to show what is the just transition, and is it empty talk or is it really improving the lives of people? Which brings us back to, are we academics creating value? And much in the same way, we should be assessing organizations on whether they're actually doing what they're promising, whether this is meaningful, whether there are, superior approaches to this, right? And that's the critical bit here. I mean, somehow thinking the social economy, I was talking about values and so on. So those are the good guys, no? But we've also heard it, by Laura and also by Ava, sometimes they aren't, right? Sometimes they think, I know it all, I'm going to tell you how to do it. And really being critical and trying to dive deep, produce the evidence, whatever that might be, quantitative evidence, qualitative evidence, co-created evidence. But I think it's all around that. And if we try to do that, we actually are able to, promote the processes, but then also look into the outcomes. And based on that, be able to really calibrate the systems that we've built in a way that they create superior value for people and the planet.
Thank you so much. So we have some drinks available, so do please join us for those. I'd just like to close by firstly thanking our wonderful panel, and then just attempting to summarise 3 key things that I think have come through in our conversation and that I think our panel have given us. Firstly, I think it's the confidence to navigate paradox and dichotomy. Secondly, you talked about listening and critically engaging, particularly with the dark side, and knowing that we need to surface some of that. But also one of the themes that I think has come through in everyone's remarks this evening is the need to be humble and challenge ourselves. So I think in that challenging of ourselves, we're really repositioning what research might look like in this space. And I wanted to conclude with something you said, Georgie, which is we're trying to solve things as part of the research process. And I think that's the energy we can leave with from this evening. So a very big thanks to everyone for contributing this evening. Thank you all for being here with us, and please do join us for a drink. Thank you.